To be honest, the number of last minute changes that I've made to the making of this episode before I start recording are a little bit more than I normally do. Although, interestingly enough, the episode is still revolving around a bunch of misunderstandings. Because I have some guys that are being misunderstood, and I have some relationship dynamics that might be a little bit misunderstood. Although, at the end of it, it's not like there's anything that's that complicated that you'd really find too much misunderstanding in it, even though most of us probably do. But I will probably get into that in like a little bit. First of all, I'm going to start with the first thing that I changed on. Now, I was going to kick things off by talking about how Louis V recently released a sandwich bag that was priced for $3,000, which I find to be quite dumb. Mostly because I don't even think ballers need to have a sandwich bag worth $3,000 because it's more about the food than the bag itself. But I stumbled onto this very interesting story before I started recording, and it's about a zoo that lets you name a cockroach after your ex and feed it to an animal on Valentine's Day, which sounded like it would be such a good idea if you were the one to go and have your ex's name put there. The only thing is, I thought about it in detail, unfortunately, like I normally do, and it didn't sound like a great idea at all. Like, it sounds good up until you actually think about it, because technically, your ex is getting some action and you're not. Or, in particularly Nairobi terms, ex wako anakulwa na wewe uko hapo tu unakaa.
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
Now, the other thing that I found a little bit unsettling with this entire thing was the fact that considering that roach or that thing that you have named after your ex that's supposed to be eaten is supposed to be eaten, like when it's not eaten, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because like it's not like animals will always eat up everything. Sometimes they can be a little bit picky, especially if the diet's good and they've been getting fed well. So if the one that's named after your ex isn't eaten, is it a good thing because even animals don't want it, or is it a bad thing because clearly you wanted it to die but it hasn't? Like, I don't know. Either way, let me just read the story that came with this because it's actually quite short, to be honest. So it says, and I quote, "The San Antonio Zoo is offering a unique way to celebrate Valentine's Day with its quote-unquote Cry Me a Cockroach fundraiser. Participants can donate to the zoo and symbolically name a roach, rat, or veggie after an ex, which will then be fed to the animals." End quote. Okay, so I'm trying to think about it like this. Naming your ex, or at least naming a roach after your ex, that could sound like a good idea, but let's look at some of the other variables that are there. You don't necessarily have to just name the cockroach. You can name a rat, you can name a veggie after your ex so that it can be fed to the animals, but you kind of think about it. Guys would probably be named on rats more so, considering that a lot of them would be expected to have cheated, or they just couldn't be found. They were always going under things, and they clearly liked being under the covers a lot, but with other women. And it probably should be handled by snakes. But you think about it, like some of us would name our exes onto veggies. Like, you kind of think about it, if it's a babe who used to get great dick, but the guy was super toxic, probably name some shit like an eggplant and feed it to a monkey. Or I could name a banana after my ex-girlfriend because I know to get to the insides, the baboon will probably have to split them shits. Like, you kind of think about it, those would probably make a little bit more sense. Putting it on a cockroach, I don't know how great or bad it is, but in reality, if I was spiteful, I'd probably name my farts after my ex because, you made me feel all full inside. But, after I let you go, I finally felt some relief. Although, then again, like, I'm one of the lucky people that doesn't have problems with his exes. Like, me and my exes are good, so I don't need to do any of this shit. So I'm just going to leave it at that and start the podcast in a way that does not alienate people who have good exes in a much nicer way by saying, welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man in touch with his inner animal, but sometimes his snake can go loose. He's a man who believes that running your mouth should be added to a cardio routine. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. This episode has started with way more animals than I normally have, although this is probably a little bit better than the time when I was talking about snakes on the plane. But then again, that was a very different story, and it was someone who was trying to join the Mile High Club. This time people are just trying to off their exes via naming them after cockroaches. They're trying to off their exes in their minds by naming cockroaches after them. And still, like, I don't know, maybe this is just a me thing, but how bad were your exes? Like, it's like some people just had some of the worst exes ever, or they've never gotten over how their ex treated them, whether good or bad, or just maybe, I don't know, it's almost like a thing that people nowadays do where it's like they hate their exes and it's almost a trendy thing to do it. So all of a sudden it's like you're finding people are so ready to go for this whole zoo thing. People have all of this bile towards their exes. Although then again, maybe it's just a me thing. Maybe I need to date some more toxic people. Either way, I'm just gonna leave that where it is because I have an episode that's full of tweets that I'm supposed to get into. And before I can do that, there's a drill to it because actually you can contribute to the making of these episodes by sending your mini tweets, whether you see them on X or on IG or on Facebook, and I'll explain that in a second because it's a very simple drill, almost sounds like a song, and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @BagakaTheD, which happens to be my personal X handle, and I will take it from there and handle it accordingly on Facebook and on IG if it happens to be a screenshot, a screen grab, ended up on someone else's reel, but it was a tweet that was from Twitter. Then the place to send it to on IG, it is @TheBreaktime_podcast, and on Facebook, it is @TheBreaktime_podcast, and I will take it from there and handle it accordingly. Now, I have a couple of tweets that I need to get into, but before I can get into the tweets that I got on X, there was one tweet that I got on WhatsApp, which I feel just needs to be discussed before I can get into the others, because this one is one of the wilder ones that I've seen in a while. Now, for anyone that is usually on Kenyan Twitter, you know of the influencer known as Amerix, and if you don't exactly know who he is or what he's all about, just know that whenever you're on Kenyan Twitter on a Saturday, there's always going to be this trending topic called Masculinity Saturday, and he's the one who pioneered it. Needless to say, he's a guy that talks about guy stuff and, you know, how being a man is supposed to be and masculinity and holding your frame and nutrition and shit like that. Now, normally I don't agree with a lot of what he says, just mostly because there's a lot of things that aren't based on facts. A lot of it are just, oh, you know, holding your frame this, holding your frame that. And yet most of it is usually just very hearsay and based on very flawed logic a lot of the times. But there are some things that he says that are particularly true. Now, there was a tweet that the guy decided to post up recently, which I found to be particularly interesting because it involved a subject that I do not think he has any experience in. Now, he says, and I quote, "Here is a WhatsApp conversation between homosexuals. One of them is in marriage. The truth is that there are men in marriage hiding there when in reality they are hardcore homosexuals. How to spot a homosexual hiding in marriage? 1. Goes for manicure and pedicure. 2. Always posting his photos on social media. 3. Concerned about his looks and fashion. 4. Locked his WhatsApp app. 5. Listens to R&B passionately. 6. Prefers anal sex with the wife. 7. Asks the wife to insert her fingers into his anus. And 8. Walks like a woman." End quote. Now, I read this shit and I honestly started laughing for the most part because I just looked at everything that he said here, and not only is a lot of this information pointlessly general and something that a lot of guys do, but like 90% of it is just absolute garbage in terms of trying to figure out who's a homosexual and who's not. And the reason I'm saying 90% of what he said here is the walks like a woman bit is the one that you could probably argue out as being homosexual. And normally, in terms of a lot of the gay people that I know, in terms of a lot of the people who are a part of the LGBT, they're usually not this flamboyant, and the ones that are a particularly small number, and most of them aren't even married. So for the most part, this guy is just giving very pointless information that I guess he mostly just got out of his head. And worse still, even if I wasn't going to dissect all of the information that he has, which I am still going to do, like, how the hell did he find this out? Because he doesn't seem like someone that converses with a lot of women, and the kind of guys that he converses with, considering the talking points that he has, aren't the type of guys that relate with homosexual men, or at least men that are a part of the LGBT and are open and straightforward about it. Like, for the most part, like, where the hell would he get this information? Now, granted, you could also ask me the same question. How the hell is it that I know that all of the points that he's given here will work or won't work? And I'll tell you that for a good chunk of my time in university, I actually had particularly close friends who were gay or just queer in general. And also I've been hit on by a lot of guys that are part of that community but are mostly in hiding. So I can probably say that there's other things to look for and none of these things work. Because goes for a manicure and pedicure, there's a lot of guys that actually do this nowadays, and I kid you not, from my own personal experience, I'll tell you that it's very relaxing and it's a nice way to pamper yourself as a person regardless of gender. Then the point of always posting his photos on social media, that one I'd also disagree with it, because you don't know if this is someone who's a content creator. You also don't know if this is someone who just wants to have a pretty good record of their life and some of the more interesting things that they've done on social media as a nice storage way, because it works a lot better in terms of preserving space on your phone. And also in the likely event that your phone gets stolen, you can still get the photos on social media. Like it's just a surefire way to store it. Then also concerned about his looks and fashion, bullshit. I will tell you for a fact, if you are concerned about your looks and looking good and dressing well, then it actually works to your favor as a man, because there's the whole halo effect of it. And when people find you more attractive, more doors can open for you. Plus people tend to take you a little bit more seriously and will give you a little bit more favor. Then the next point that he brought up was locks his WhatsApp app, which I think like 80-90% of men that are in relationships do this, just mostly because people aren't trusting of their partners and some of them are actually just cheaters. So not unless if all of them are screwing each other, I don't think this point holds water. Then listens to R&B passionately. I listen to R&B passionately, and I can say for a fact that I'm not gay. Also, like, R&B is just a really good genre. Like, for me, if I was to choose one genre to listen to for the rest of my life, it'll either be a toss-up between R&B and hip-hop. Like, I don't see why the fuck this guy is attacking people that love R&B. Then prefers anal sex with a wife. There's plenty of dudes that do this, but they're not gay. And then asks wife to insert fingers. Some guys are a fan of getting their G-spot touched. And then walks like a woman. Still, in as much as you could argue this out, you could still say that, maybe the guy's just been raised in a very feminine environment, so that's just what he picked up. So all this to say, everything that's been said here is completely wrong and mostly pointless in terms of using for a gaydar, if you can call it that. So I'm just gonna leave it at that and move it on to the tweets, which I need to start with. So on to our very first tweet of this episode, and it's actually a reply to an original tweet that said, and I quote, "Y'all shame sex workers but not drug dealers?" End quote. To which someone went and replied to this and said, and I quote, "That's because drug dealers aren't on our TLs every day trying to convince us that selling drugs is an honorable job." End quote. Now, when I saw this as a tweet, at first you're like, oh shit, that's a proper comeback. But the reality of it is, like, it kind of even goes beyond this. Because when you actually kind of think about it, a drug dealer, like the rich top level kingpin drug dealers, when you kind of think about it, are the embodiment of a lot of things that guys wish they were or wish they had. Because they tend to have a lot of money. They tend to have a group of people that are willing to follow them and battle in their name at a moment's notice. They know how to navigate the streets and they tend to be particularly aggressive, and people want to be them or people want to be with them. So at the end of the day, it just serves a guy ideal in as much as, the whole career path or just job of being a drug dealer is particularly immoral and mostly wrong. But for the most part, it actually tends to tick those boxes. Please explain to me how exactly a sex worker ticks all the women's boxes of an ideal job description or an ideal lifestyle besides possibly the money. Because you kind of think about it, you're putting your private parts for people to see, whether it's online or offline, you're doing it for the money. And also, when you're done, the person resents you a lot more than before they started doing it with you. Like, you kind of think about it, being a sex worker doesn't really have the same sort of social benefits that being a drug dealer does. Now, granted, both of them aren't particularly what you'd consider upright professions, so of course you could classify them as undignified work, but when you kind of think about it, like, being a drug dealer will always elicit some level of respect as opposed to being a sex worker. Like, okay, granted, nowadays sex work is being a little bit more mainstreamed and a little bit more accepted, and it's mostly just because of shit like porn, but mostly OnlyFans, and it's mostly just because there's a lot of women that are making a shit ton of money on there, so it's starting to seem like a more lucrative opportunity for a lot of women to get into. But the reality of it is, if I go out there and I become a drug dealer, if I leave the life and I try to go on the straight and narrow, I'm good to go. Like, I can pretty much fix myself up and I'll be good to go as an individual and a contributing member of society. But when you go in as a sex worker, say you're doing OnlyFans and shit, and people know about that, you're reputationally damaged, and not unless if you have, for example, Kim K's PR team, you probably won't be able to escape the fact that you have done sex work and your gains are mostly from sex work. Like, even though you are to pivot to a different industry, and you make a bunch of money and you get yourself, like, for example, a really nice car, people are still going to look at you and be like, she probably fucked a nigga to get it. And that kind of dignity drop doesn't usually get resolved over time, because provided you're a part of a society that knew that you were doing this, whatever it is that you're going to do after that, you're still going to be looked at as the person that was fucking around. Like, think about it like that. As opposed to being a drug dealer, you could pretty much drop, then change for the straight and narrow, and people will actually think of you as a quote-unquote businessman to some degree. Although, then again, I could be wrong about this, and there's way more differences to this entire set of professions, but I am just going to leave it at that for the sake of time and move it on to our very next tweet of this episode. So it says, and I quote, "Marrying someone from the same country or culture is very important because I need to know we have the same priorities. Not the one where you'll say we should use our life savings for our dog's surgery." End quote. Okay, I feel like this one is a little bit more on the extreme end, and this one probably might target white people as well, but considering that there's a lot of middle class people that have started treating pets almost at the same level as children, I wouldn't say that this is too far off. Now, granted, the whole marrying from the same country or from the same culture does carry a lot of merit and truth in reality, but what I've noticed is there's a lot of people that tend to be crossing those boundaries, and they seem to be doing particularly well. Normally, I am a supporter of this, but at the same time, I don't support it 100% and, fight back against, the whole concept of intermarriage and, like marrying from like a different race. But I do get where some of these issues can actually become a thing, because even from like Kenyan tribes, here in Kenya, you find that there are certain differences. So for example, like in the Kikuyu culture, the child is the woman's, or at least is the mother's, and in the event that you guys split, the kid is supposed to remain with the mother. But with the Luhya's culture, or at least most of the flavors of the Luhya culture, you find that the child is the man's or the father's. So if the woman is leaving, she's supposed to leave the kids with the man, because that's a culture thing. Now imagine if a Kikuyu woman and a Luhya man marry each other, and at some point they want to split. Like, do you now suddenly look at it from the cultural side, or do you now start to get legal and technical, where now the legalities of it, of how old is the kid and shit like that, start to come in? There's also other things like, for example, wife inheritance amongst the Luo community. Where, for example, if say I pass on and, my wife is left as a widow, and, my brother is there, he has his wife and his kids, like he can actually take my wife as his, as, some version of wife inheritance. Or for example, if say my wife is unable to bear children, I'm supposed to go for, for her sister and go and sleep with her, and, whatever offspring come, the offspring are now supposed to be mine and my wife's kids. Like, will my wife be okay with that? And yet she's from a different community. Like, those are some of those issues that can come between two cultures and can cause quite the rift. And can I say that they're really, really all that bad? At least considering that there's a lot more people today that aren't going full cultural on everything, you could just say that, for the most part, we've managed to get past some of these things. But still, under some circumstances, you will find that the difference in cultures can cause clashes and can cause issues. So if you are choosing to marry or to get a partner from the same community, it's perfectly warranted. But even if you don't, there's still ways that you can get around it, provided that both sides are open to having discussions about the entire thing. But then again, I haven't gotten married, so I can't entirely say this shit for certain. So I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our very final tweet of this episode. So it says, and I quote, "Our parents should bring back arranged marriages. So many of us are unable to find a partner." End quote. Okay, so can we bring back arranged marriages the way our parents or our grandparents used to do it? Yes, but no. Like, yes, it can come back. We can still bring back some version of an arranged marriage, at least for the most of us that don't have it. You know, if you're part of a community that does that strictly, like say if you're Somali Muslim and your first wife has to be chosen by your family, like that one is a different story. But for the vast majority of us that don't have that, can we really bring back arranged marriages? I don't entirely think so. Just mostly because there's a lot that happens out here in these streets that our parents don't know. And while that sounds like good news for us, if we've been doing some bad things on our end and we're hoping to get a good partner, it's also a bad thing on the other side. Not just because you could be hiding who you truly are, but also because the other person could be hiding who they truly are. Like, from a guy's perspective, there's the whole, you don't know if you're marrying a hoe or some shit. And, we could make those arguments, definitely. People can be like, they come from a good family, blah, blah, blah. But very well that Shorty's been in the streets and, Shorty's been railed by a couple of your homies and that she's about the whole life or she's about the fast life. And her settling down with you is just her way of appeasing the parents. So stuff like that, and it kind of makes it hard for you to accept whatever it is that your parents are saying in the name of she comes from a good family, so she's going to be a good person to marry. And you can also flip the gender for the women's side, because let's say, for example, it'll be said, this guy is from a nice family, blah, 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 but his ex and he beats his ex, and very well that this guy sleeps around a lot, or that this guy has very, very bad tempers, and you don't know what that could lead to should you choose to be with this person. And of course, both families can come together and just say that some things can be talked out and agreements can be made. And of course, it's not like a majority of arranged marriages were with someone's soulmate or with someone that they particularly loved. And all of those do make sense. It's just with the amount of information that a lot of us as peers have on each other today, the idea of having an arranged marriage would probably only ever work if us as peers were allowed to also do some of our own investigation into this person. Because the whole thing about coming from a good family is good, but that shit only works till someone is like 20 years old. After that, there's a bunch of other things that they'll do as a grown adult that you can't entirely link back to the family, at least not in its entirety. And this is regardless of gender. So there's a lot of times that you might find that if we were to bring back arranged marriages, some of us would be getting married to hoes. Some of us would be getting married to people that are queer, and they are only doing whatever it is that they're doing by getting married to you just to appease the parents or to keep their queerness inside. And maybe you're not a fan of that, and maybe you're homophobic. So, that might end up bringing issues for you. But at the end of the day, it's not like the parents know. But you as a person, you as someone that interacts with people that might be associated with her or him, know very well. So the whole idea of arranged marriages, can it be a good idea? Yes. But is it going to be a good idea with today's society of freedoms and, wanting to choose for yourself? Yes, but only if we allow the ability for someone to do their own checking and to determine, of which for the most part, that's just your parents hooking you up with a potential partner. Of which that shit usually happens. It's just that most times it's a relative or a friend that'll do that, not necessarily a parent. So can you really say that it should come back? Because from what I'm seeing, it's still there. It's just that we don't take the opinions, or at least the decision of the parents, as highly. At least most of us don't. And for the most part, with today's climate of wanting to marry and be with someone for the sake of love, I think that most people would probably try it out for a little bit and then revert back and be like, you know what, I think I'll just go and look for the person I want to be with on my own. Although, then again, I might be wrong about this entire thing, just the same I could be wrong about other things on this episode and this podcast, so I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. On Facebook, it is at The Break Time Podcast. And on IG, it is at The Break Time _podcast. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.